White House's direction, the EPA gave New Yorkers misleading assurances that there was no health risk from the debris-laden air after the WTC collapse, according to an internal inquiry. The White House, quote, convinced EPA to add reassuring statements and delete cautionary ones by having the National Security Council control EPA communication under September 11th terror attacks, to a report issued by this Inspector General. So she found out what happened. There are actually reassuring statements that were deleted. Well, let's read more about it. In all, the EPA issued 5 news releases within 10 days of the attacks, and 4 more by the end of 2001, reassuring the public about air quality. Soon, respiratory ailments and other problems began to surface in hundreds. Now it is in the thousands of people who are sick because of this very dangerous dust. As you see in this report, a BBC report. Now, one of the problems is, how do you know that the respiratory problems are due to the dust or something else? You need something to characterize the dust that you can find in the lungs of these victims, and we have found something more now that can identify the dust. It's these red grain chips, and I'll be discussing. So I hope it will be helpful to them. They're having trouble getting medical coverage because, you see, it's just blamed on, I don't know how. First of all, they say, well, how do you know it's the dust? I've heard that argument, and then they have trouble proving it, but we can show now a characteristic for the dust in these red grain chips. Oh, this is interesting. This is from a Downtown Express quoting people. I'll just read a little more. James Connaughton said the White House directed the EPA to add and delete information based on how it should be released publicly. It was much more important, he said, to open Wall Street than it was to worry about our health. We've known it was a cover-up from the beginning. Okay, there's some more. I think we'll go on. So now, what we did is to request samples of dust from citizens living in New York City. One fellow, Frank D'Alessio, collected a sample right here. It's on the Manhattan side, basically the mouth of the Brooklyn Bridge as it comes into Manhattan. The red circles represent the towers. Thank you, Jim, for this map. There's another map in our paper. I thought this was good. And then there's 3 other samples. So this sample was collected, as Frank noted, 10 minutes. And we have his testimony of how he collected this dust 10 minutes after the collapse of the North Tower. This cannot be contaminated by cleanup operations, which did not begin 10 minutes after the collapse, of the tower. It's just great. He collected this, and we got a sample of that. The other, another sample in this area, one of these was collected the next day. The window had been left open, and this dust had collected inside, and then the individual collected the dust. And so now this, we had the chain of custody on all of these, and Jeanette went through how I traveled in the presence of witnesses to collect the dust sample. We have other dust samples sent directly to other scientists. They see the same thing, red gray chips, okay? Not me. By the way, I have no idea how to fabricate this material. You'll see it's a highly engineered material. So if you think I, somehow made this stuff, I do not know how. I didn't make it. I don't know how to do it either. Okay, and nor could I get it into all these samples that have gone out now to scientists. Like the fellow in France, Frédéric Henri Coulonier. He has found these red gray chips as well, and his sample was sent by somebody, a collector, an individual citizen of New York City I'd never even heard of. I mean, that he sent, somehow it was arranged, and there are people helping now getting these samples out there. Now, one of the things we wanted to do was to check for consistency between the different samples. I'll show you that coming right up. Here's some views of the dust. Here's a first view then of the red gray chips. I'll show you the gray side in a minute. You see the red side. There's also a lot of spheres that happen to be magnetic in the dust. These are iron-rich spheres, very typically. There's some other silicon-rich spheres which are interesting. By the way, to melt iron requires a temperature of about 2,800 Fahrenheit. There's a lot of these. Of course, there are other sources, so besides just thermite. So it's not the strongest evidence, but nevertheless, there are a lot of these spheres. The strong evidence comes from the unreacted chips themselves, as we'll see soon. Hold on. So I observed these in June '07, and here you go. Here's a chip on edge. Now you can see the red layer and the shiny black-gray layer. If you look closely here at this chip, you can pick that out too, but this is probably the best one. This is Dr. Farrer at BYU who oriented the chip so that you can see it edge on and see these two layers. Some of the chips have more than two layers. Most of them have two. This was seen independently, a sample sent directly to a scientist by the name of Mark Basile. I have met him actually. He came up and he said, when I was in Boston giving a talk, he said, I want to get some of this dust independently of you, thank you. That's fine. That's why I want it to. So he was able to get that, and this is what he found. See that? I mean, you can't mistake it now. It's a very beautiful example of a red layer and then the gray material. What is this stuff? When I saw it early on, I thought, well, I don't know, maybe it's just, paint. That'd be my first guess. But, early guess, but we'll see. This is the electron microscope lab. I just have to tell you real quickly, Dr. Farrer did a great deal of work and service here. He's a director of the TEM lab, the Transmission Electron Microscopy Lab, an expert in all this equipment. This is scanning electron microscope, which is used mostly. And Jeff is now using TEM to study these samples further where he can. He did not want to be shown, and so I respected that here. I showed his arm. I thought that would be all right. This is Niels Harrit. He is quite outspoken. He became the first author. Jeff was the first author for a long time on this paper. But I'm going to tell you that story just quickly because it's a human interest story and also a science story. So Jeff is at UC, Jeff Farrer, Department of Physics and Astronomy, BYU in Utah. So, and Danny Farnsworth, descendant of Philo T. Farnsworth, by the way, relative, the TV inventor. He is also at BYU Physics Department, Physics and Astronomy. Anyway, so Jeff, before publishing, he said, I better check with the chair of the department. He gave the department chair a copy of this paper. It was a little earlier than this version you see here. Of course, this was perhaps 6 weeks before it was published, at least 6 weeks. Anyway, the chair read it, and then Jeff was called before the dean's office. I can tell you, as he told me, he said they did not want to see this paper published at all. This is a dean and his 3 associates, deans. And Jeff, saying, why is that? And let's explain this, and please tell me why. And they didn't really have any good reasons. The chair, the next day, stood up for it, and he said, this is science. You can't just squash publication. Think of Galileo. I don't know what arguments the chair used, but that was his argument, it's science. You have to let it be published. And he felt it was good science. He did make some recommendations. There were some comments that we had made about the implications that were removed from the paper. So it's really strictly a scientific treatise. And then it was approved by the chair. He told me privately that he was convinced by this paper, which I hope you will read, that there were indeed explosives in the World Trade Center towers on 9/11. Now, I hope that motivates you. This is a good guy. He's a new chair since I left. I wish he'd been there. I was, going through my struggles. A great guy. good physicist, solid scientist. I can tell you a little more, but that's probably more than I should have said already. So, but anyway, the upshot was, though, was that the chair did not feel that Jeff should be first author. That might cause problems with his career, his job.